Thank you. Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you for reminding us not to be white bread, to be mutilated and to lose the essence of Jesus, but to think about how we want to invite different multiple stories in the picture of doing mission. So thank you very much for that. Now it's your turn to think about missions with us. We have again Menti, so please take out your phones. If you were playing with your phones before that, that was not really preferred, but now you can legitimately take out your phones. And we would like to have the Menti up on screen, please. You know the drill. Look for the QR code and go for it. And maybe we have already had enough likes. So if you are all there, can you wave your phone at me so that we can move the slide? All right, we'll give it 10 seconds. Oh, look. All right, we give you 10 more seconds, and then John will read out the slides, all right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's go.
All right. So based off of the polls we're seeing here, we're seeing God's command. Okay, there's a shift between 4.9, 4.8 between the new landscape, needed for new landscape, and God's command. So not necessary, 1.3. Too negatively associated with colonization.
So what's the question, John? Yes. Mission is?
Mission is God's command. Mission is needed for the new landscape. Mission is not necessary. And mission is too negatively associated with colonization. And we're seeing from most of your responses that you're saying mission is God's command.
Great.
Yeah.
So we still need missions for the new landscape. That's good to know. How about the next question?
So the next question is saying missions in the future should include. Let's see what the responses are from the crowd. All right, so among our options, wow.
We have workers.
We have workers, discipleship, contextualization, discipleship, all of life existence.
Me.
Online presence, dental, discipleship again. So it's clear that missions in the future should include discipleship, which is quite interesting because even in our table discussions today, most of us agree that discipleship is a big factor of what missions in the new landscape should be. So there's still more.
Yep, I think it's hard to capture it on the screen, but we have about 90 responses already, so that's great. Thank you so much for all your interaction. I think we are happy to listen to our next speaker.
Yes. All right. So, be happy to introduce our next speaker, who served as the chair of Arise Asia and Asia in 2022 Congress. He's also the regional director for Lausanne Movement in East Asia. Now, after several years of pastoral missions, he joined OMF to reach urban students and young people in East Asia. He previously served as the director of Christy Wilson Center for World Missions and adjunct professor of church planting and missions at Gordon Cornell Theological Seminary. He has his master's in divinity in Gordon Cornell Theological Seminary, an MBA from Peking University, and a PhD from Oxford. Too much. Please welcome Dr.
And
David
he has
Rowe.
4 wonderful children.
Just wanted to thank the committee for inviting me here to talk about rethinking missions. I just quickly want to say, you probably are trying to figure out who I am. I'm actually a missionary kid. I grew up in Asia as a missionary kid. My parents were the first Asian missionaries to join OMF and to be sent out in 1970. So I came into missions at the age of 4 and then lived in Taiwan and Singapore. And then God called me and my wife and our two babies to China. So we served in China for 9 years with OMF, and then Taiwan for 6 years. And so missions has been in my blood. So when I saw people were saying we shouldn't do missions, I was just wondering, wow, who am I speaking to? But missions, let me just start with this. I've been talking about this Arise conference, and can I see here who attended Arise? Can I hear everyone? Okay. If you haven't heard of Arise, you'll hear about it very soon, because I'll explain what has taken place. But I was sharing this vision because, when I was a missionary in China, I came out and then we saw a mission movement come out of China. These Chinese house church pastors under persecution had this vision for missions. And so I met with this pastor from Beijing, and I had been doing my PhD research on this for the last 10 years. It took me 10 years to finish this. I finally finished it, but I was asking this pastor who I've been working with, I said, now that I'm outside of China, I can't go back in, what about let's start an Asian mission movement among young people? And he looked at me, and this was a pastor whose church had just been decimated. He had been traveling from village and city to city within China, planting a church almost every week, very missional inside of China. But his vision was to send the gospel back to Jerusalem. And he said, David, I'm going to go behind you, and I want our church to donate 50,000 US behind it. And I was like, here's a persecuted church in China with 1.3 billion people to reach, and he has a heart for the world. I knew at that moment this was a God moment. This wasn't something of planning and strategy, but this was really a God moment. And so I said, okay, I'm going to start this movement called Arise. We didn't even know what it was called at the time. I didn't have lots of funds. I didn't have a secretary. I had no one. I just started to share this vision. And slowly within, actually we started in December of 2022. And in 8 months' time, we saw a movement of God. So just to say that it started with the persecuted church in China. And I want to say quickly, if we have time, the PPT will go, and I want you to turn to Acts chapter 2, because we just covered that this morning. I promise you, when Bishop Ephraim had talked about the church in Acts chapter 2, how they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to breaking of bread and to prayer, and everyone was filled with awe at the many wonderful signs and that was performed by the apostles. And you see all the things that are great about the church. There was communion, there was unity, there was giving, there was actually helping and the poor, and they're praising God, enjoying the favor of God's people, and the Lord added to the number to them daily. I thought about this. Why couldn't the book of Acts end in Acts chapter 2, 47? Think about it. Wouldn't this be a great place to end the book of Acts? Because everything that the church is about that's really healthy seems to be described in the first 2 chapters of the book of Acts. A perfect, almost perfect scenario for the church to be birthed. All the principles that we've been hearing about come from right here. But something's missing. Because they're all Jews. And it was led by, of course, the 12 apostles. Peter, being the apostle to the Jews, had a great church. And we could just use this model to say, this is how we should look. But you know what? God doesn't end it right here. He actually starts in Acts chapters 3 and 4 and 5. He brings in persecution. And he decimates the church. And they get scattered. Stephen gets martyred in chapter 7. And the church gets scattered in chapter 8. And guess what? Chapter 9 is when Saul see on the road to Damascus, gets called, and his calling is to become the apostle to the Gentiles. And then from Acts 9 and on, it's to the Gentiles, to the ends of the earth. You know, we all know that passage, Acts chapter 1, verses 8, that says, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria." And if you think about most of your ministries, if you're imagining in a Jewish context, it's probably surrounded Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. And we need apostles Peter's to focus on Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. But Acts chapter 9 and beyond. Chapter 10 is Cornelius. Chapter 11 is the Antioch church. Chapter 13 is when they send out Paul and Barnabas, and it spreads all the way to Acts 28. And I'm going to say that from Acts chapter 9 to 28 to the ends of the earth is the primary focus of the New Testament church. My final proof, if you haven't figured this out, is in Romans, the last verse of Romans. We think Romans, being a theological book, is for the church. It is the apostle Paul, who is the apostle to the Gentiles, that writes this. He says, "It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ is not known." And the last few verses is this: "I proclaim Jesus Christ so that all the Gentiles may come to obey." The New Testament is about going to the ends of the earth. And that's the missing piece. And when we brought together 1,800 young people and we challenged them, we be very focused in saying, go to where there is no gospel. That's what we mean. Meaning that, yes, we need to reach China. Yes, we need to reach our neighbors. Yes, we need to reach people who are like us in our own context. But where does the gospel need to go? Also, if most importantly, where the gospel is not. And that was our theme: one life, one challenge. Go to where there's no gospel. Can we show the video quickly of what took place?
Over 1,700 participants ages 18 to 30 from across Asia and the Middle East are arriving right now at this hall.
Many of them have never left their countries before, so the energy was palpable and everybody was so gracious and kind.
And our hope and prayer is that as we come together, we'll see what is God's purpose in our generation.
That God is passionate about His name. Knowing God's passion is of the utmost importance. Trying to discover our passion and use it to serve God.
Participating in God's story is the greatest purpose one can have in life.
I think worshiping together with the nations has been pretty amazing so far. Just sense such a deep hunger, and I feel like everyone here desires to be impacted for the gospel.
We do missions so that the nations would worship. The nations in this room, and just being touched by God, being refreshed by God, and also receiving their assignment from God, because I really feel like it's in worship where you hear the Holy Spirit, right?
And we're believing by faith that everything that we've learned and the things that we've experienced, all the great speakers, the innovation lab and the different workshops, that we're going to take all that and be able to go out, and as our hearts are set on fire, that we can make a difference for Jesus Christ.
It may be the unreached in your city, your country, or the ends of the earth. Brothers and sisters, God is sending you. He's sending you to His mission around the world. Will you say yes to God's invitation? It's so worth it.
The risk-taking is not about physical discomfort. It's about surrender.
God was meeting a generation that has been characterized by desperation, by loneliness. This generation has been counted off by so many. If God says, I am going to use that generation to shake the world.
So I thought about, because when I was meeting with all these young people, I would ask them, what really stood out for you. And as we were planning this conference, there are a few things that really worked for this generation. But I'm going to share with you some of them. And I know many of you already, you'll hear this all across. Of course, this generation really they really want to contribute to this. They don't just want to be hearing messages, they want to be involved. So that's why we had this innovation lab. And we really had them tackle mission problems so that it's not just listening, but they're participating in it. As you know, this generation's really into worship. So we had a great worship team from Singapore, a worship team from Thailand. We had prayer. It was really a powerful time. We had one night dedicated. We invited Tim Tennant from Asbury Seminary to bring, and we just sensed the Holy Spirit coming down. There was a revival taking place. There was the presence of God. These are all very important. And then also, of course, we want to bring topics that young people like. They're interested in social justice. They're interested in creation care. They're interested in business as a mission and using the marketplace and even social justice issues for LGBT. But those are issues that we also covered. But I'm going to say this. Those weren't the most important things. We also had a K-pop band come. Now that's really excited people. Great worship, even great prayer. We had mentors there, which young people want. Let me share with you the 5 core values that I think changed this conference, that people came to me that said, this is different from anything that we've seen before. Number 1, this is, in some sense, the first time they're hearing that aligning their hearts to God's mission first. Because in general, we tell young people, find your own passion, find your own gifting, find what God has given you first, and then God could use you for His glory. There's nothing wrong with that in some sense. But we turned the equation around and said, first, capture God's heart for the nations. That's number 1. Once you get that, everything falls into place. Number 2, there is a surrendering of our rights, relinquishing our rights. And that came up with the second night with Sarah Brule, this term Hineni from the Old Testament, here am I. Saying yes to God before even the question is asked. Very different from what they were hearing from our churches. God could use you, but this is more of, first, yes, Lord, here am I. What do you want me to do? Not what I want to do for you. We're turning I don't know, you see the difference there. It's turning the equation. And then number 3, yes, there's an intimacy with God that we focus on the third night. But I will say this. We have, I've been talking with people, and even in Indonesia and so on, there's a lot of prayer conferences going along. There's a lot of revivals taking place. But revival that is devoid of missions is weak at best. Let me say that again. Revival devoid of missions only replenishes your soul. Then finally, and this is all learned actually from the house churches, a sacrifice. There's going to be a cost involved. And the places that still need the gospel will require potentially people to lay down their lives and potentially die for the sake, not just for their own faith, but for the sake of other people's faith. That's a different level of sacrifice. Let me share with you a final story here. This pastor that came to me that's leading the mission movement in China, they have a vision to send out 20 missionaries from China to the rest of the world. This pastor came to me and said this. He said, Dave, there is a person that influenced me the most. 1947, a few young people from China caught this Back to Jerusalem vision. Young people, mostly women actually in the beginning, moved from eastern China, headed towards Xinjiang, landed in Xinjiang 1948, 2 years before the communist takeover. Communists came in, arrested them, put most of them in prison. Many of them died. But one survived after 31 years in prison. His name is Simon Chow. He came out of prison. After 31 years in prison, he started to share this vision of going back to Jerusalem. And that is the seed of the missionary movement. Join us. Lay down your life for the sake of those who have no opportunity to hear the name of Jesus Christ.